Hello, wonderful. Welcome. Thank you all for coming to our conversation. We are doing something different this month, hybrid. So we have artists here in the gallery, which is very nice. And then we're also recording this for people who can't make it. And so you'll be able to catch this on YouTube shortly, actually. So welcome to the conversation. Today's just going to be that, a conversation with the artist whose work is on view at Roy through the month of April, I think ending May 6th. Is that true? And I want to start by just thanking the sponsors that make events like this possible: Ohio Arts Council, Greater Columbus Arts Council, the Columbus Foundation, encova Foundation. Their support means the world to us and to the emerging artists that we serve. And so we did a whole CBS morning layout here in the gallery so we can see everybody and their work behind them. If you can't hear, let me know that in the chat so that I can monitor that and make any adjustments that need to be. Also, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I will be monitoring that, and I'll be able to make sure that the artists respond to that. In the meantime, I have a list of questions, so I'll start with that. And we'll just start off with some introductions. Who you are, how you came to Roy, and a little bit about the artwork that you have here that's on view. And Katherine, if you wouldn't mind starting.
Sure. My name is Katherine Adkins. I couldn't remember all the questions.
Oh, yes. How did you come to Roy? How did you find us? And talk a little bit about your work.
Sure. So my undergrad was at CCAD, so I knew about Roy G. Biv back in the days. I would go to the gallery hop and see Roy G. Biv at the last location in Short North. So it's always been on my radar. For the work that I have presented, I have abstract paintings that are biomorphic in nature, and I'm really interested in varying intensities of color and texture. And I'll talk more in the later questions.
Okay, very good. Thank you. That gives us a good introduction. And if you are watching this, Katherine is sort of sitting in front of her work. So you'll be able to pick up on some of those organic shapes that she has in her work and the glitter that's in her work. So you'll be able to see that. Okay, great. And just around the table, let's do that. Nalani, you're next.
I'm Nalani Stolz. I first heard about Roy when I moved here 4 years ago for my MFA, and have been following all your exhibitions since, and was excited to finally get a chance to show you.
Very good.
My work tends to contend with the body and the ways in which it's constantly changing and morphing throughout our lives. And so I seek out materials that do that as well. So the work I'm showing here, which is kind of behind me in the middle here, is made out of fermented tea that I grow these skins that sort of change and dry out throughout the exhibition.
You have sort of you don't know it until you're in the space, but there's kind of a musical quality about them because the liquid drips through and hits these like drum-like surfaces at the top. Every once in a while I'll be here in the gallery at the beginning. Wait, what was that? Do we have a leak? No, we do not. It is art. Okay, excellent. Very good. Yes, Aaron.
My name is Aaron Burleson. I was actually an intern here a while ago for a little bit, and the pandemic hit, so everything changed. But I've been here, throughout the years, and so it's very cool that like my first show out of undergrad is here. And I've been wanting to get more involved in the Franklinton scene. I work here, so it's just cool that I'm being like ingratiated into the community. And my work is this big collage in the background. I normally do painting and drawing, but I figured that I wanted to make something more expansive, more immersive, and something that feels a little more real and tangible than just like two-dimensional painting, I guess. So that's sort of where I'm at in my trajectory.
Yeah, great. And I know last night we had Franklinton Friday, so the opening, and your work is also inviting in that you want people to interact with your artwork. So can you talk a little bit about how people are interacting with your work? They're sitting around the fire pit, you have a ladder so they can get closer to some of the work that's a little bit higher. And so maybe talk a little bit about that and why that's important in the work that you've installed here.
Yeah, I mean, I have basically the rules that you can touch anything in the space. I have like a set of magic cards that you can play with. I have a little story you can listen to by the campfire, a booklet. I just think it's nice, like if there's an installation and if I'm making a world, then you should be able to touch it and like feel it and be a part of it. But the problem is that no one really naturally wants to do that. Just like in how art normally is. So it's hard to invite people and have them actually participate in it. But I just think it makes it more real, and you sort of like take on the persona that I'm making through the space.
That's good. I know last night, once we gave people permission to interact with the work, they did. So that's great. We had a couple of visitors in the gallery today. And when I gave the speech about who's doing what and the thought behind it and said, oh, the artist has invited you to, immediately over to the chair, sit down, put the headphones on. So yeah, I think people are looking for those kinds of connections with artwork, and looking for those kinds of, shared experiences and to delve a little more deeply into what it is that we're doing. So Nalani's work is actually suspended from the ceiling. And it is not interactive necessarily, though people can get up close to it. And in fact, I did see people last night who we just put those little stanchions down so someone wouldn't walk into it. But once they understood, and it only got knocked over a couple times, so that's good, it worked. But people were very curious to get up close and not touch, but maybe smell the skins and interact with them a little bit. So can you talk a little bit about the intention of how you suspend those objects and why they are at the heights that they are?
I do want them to be close enough that you can really get up close and try to, because I think the material is sort of unfamiliar, so trying to kind of understand what it is and see the water and light through it as well. But still high enough, of course, that people can actually get close and the strings are not keeping them from doing that. And then that kind of drip to have those suspended in those placements so that they're dripping together into these comments.
Yeah. And your work, of course, is using these threads to suspend, which it's fascinating, the thought process behind how that works. They're knotted in sections so that you can, it can be a little bit easier, I guess, to install them. Also, it's not one continuous piece of string, which is also an interesting conversation. And Erin's work has some strings in it too. So that's really, you did not conversation, you both just have strings in your work. So that's very interesting. And I'm kind of curious about that because each of you has, applied to Roy for a show because it's a juried space. So the jurors would have invited your work and then our curatorial team would have put your work together, probably thinking about aesthetics, themes, sensibilities. And so maybe talk a little bit about that intersectionality of your work and how, even your color schemes are similar, even your treatment of space is similar. So Katherine, could you pick that conversation up?
Definitely. So looking at the materials before seeing them in person, like looking at the digital files, I definitely saw shared themes with your work of suggestions of the body without it being overtly figurative. And then hearing more about your environment, Erin, what you created, and like this sense of like post-worldly is like sort of an escape from the grid. I'm starting to see more and more parallels, and I think all of us are thinking about connectivity of different elements and like constellations of different forms in space.
Yeah, I definitely see these like moments where the imagery in your paintings kind of connects to the sculptures where it feels like they are these like cellular or body moments. And they almost feel like they are full of like water or liquid as they're moving through the paintings. So it's great to kind of see that visual connection.
And there's like a lot of like, obviously we talked about like the earthly shapes.
Yeah.
And I didn't even think about like how suspension plays a role in all of our works, like yours being suspended on the wall, and yours being held by these strings. I think there's like an element of chance that goes into that, just in seeing how like the placement of each individual work, it like changes based on like what orientation it's at, or like, I don't know, there's something about, I think it's more overt with your works, like, and how hanging things, it's really dependent on the space and like what options are given to you. And I think there's something that's like very experimental about like just hanging something and seeing like what it does when it's left alone.
Your work has that too, where you clearly like worked to the space and sort of
Yeah, I like the way that the lights from the gallery, the shadows of the strings, even when we were lighting Catherine's work, wanting to have those shadows in those negative space moments in your work also, and how the glitter reacts to the light too. But each of the works takes sort of on another layer of engagement, another life, if you will, with the reflection. Lighting that tent was not an easy thing to do. It's a very reflective surface, but you know, it pops back and you can literally see yourself in the tent, which puts you in the artwork too. So each of you were really thoughtful about how, you know, the audience would approach your work. Can you talk a little bit about that? And when you're hanging work and installing in spaces, how you're considering what the viewer will do when they come to the space? And anybody can start that.
Well, I guess for mine, it was kind of challenging because there's like so much to put in like just the space between those two columns. So like just the issue of flow, like people being able to like go through and experience it was sort of difficult because otherwise they could just sort of get trapped in there. But like, and it's kind of hard to like encourage people to really take like alternative routes through the space. I had to like reassure a lot of people last night, again, to like go back to what we talked about, like that you can do it, it's okay. So yeah, there's something about like just trying to invite people and create like a home, essentially. That's like what I'm trying to make, a temporary home. And a lot of chance goes into that.
Sure. And with each iteration, it's a little different. In fact, even in this space, your original vision changed a few times during the installation process.
Yeah, it's a very like reactive and like associative thing. Because I have to think about like what people are actually going to like perceive it as, rather than, because it's a lot of it's based on like memory, my own personal memory, and like associations I've picked up. So I can't really assume that everyone's going to have that same connection.
Right. Right. Nalani, how about you? Sorry. When you're thinking about people and how they're going to interact, I mean, not just these suspended pieces behind you, but you have a piece that is inhabiting a corner of the gallery, and how that light and those threads interact with each other and what the viewer can do.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm interested in figuring out those sort of those moments where you're seeing the entire piece from further away, and I think this wall creates that nice like, moment where you come and can kind of see it, but then also how does the viewer get close? And thinking about the architecture of that corner, that the weaving sort of becomes this thing that blocks off this space, but that then you can also enter the space and kind of dip under and see the weaving from both sides.
I was wondering if like people could do that, because
That's
I was kind of curious.
But
Some very brave people last night did do it.
Okay.
But not everybody did. I think that is true. I mean, that is a conversation because, you know, we're not a museum. Roy is a space for experimentation and for pushing the limits and, you know, for challenging the viewer. And so I think that we're so conditioned by other spaces to not do those things unless we are invited to do those things, that we do hang back until we're invited to do so.
Yeah.
So it really is interesting, you know, in any of your works really, to have someone, you know, how close can they get to it? And when you say it's okay, the artist's intention is that you do, oh, it's permission, excellent. I'm under the barrier and I'm in the corner now, da, 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 da. And even with your work, Catherine, though, we're not inviting people to touch your work, but they are getting closer and closer to it, I think, to sort of see the layers and how things are done, and, you know, just to kind of get in those little spaces where the shadows are. So yeah, but you don't really have that intention for the viewer to interact, but it is inviting work.
Yeah, and this element of permission and relationship of the viewer to the work. I'm thinking a lot about boundaries and forms and space, and how they either have intimacy with each other within the piece, or they have clear distinctions and are asking for permission to touch, like in the composition. So yes, I'm not asking people to touch the work, but there's a tactility and like an allure to want to touch. And like I had a neighbor a few years ago, she was blind, and I remember like bringing down a piece for her to touch and experience. And it was permission in that instance of wanting to share. And like when I think the question was originally that you asked,
thinking about the viewer when you're installing things.
So both in the making and the installing, I want the work to operate at different viewing ranges. So like high contrast areas might be apparent from across the street out the window, but I want there to be an unfolding down to the smallest particle as you get closer. And I think the light really helps the track lines.
I think
with
so.
The glitter and the different aggregates that I'm using.
And even intentionally, I recall when we were installing the work, there's a piece over your right shoulder that has its own space. It has its own section of a wall, and you purposefully did not put anything near it so that the viewer could get there and not be distracted by anything else. And why that piece in particular for that experience? Because of its texture maybe, or its composition, or so that's cool. Very intentional, which you know, is certainly very appreciated, I think, by the viewer, that, you know, you have some intention behind what it is that you're asking the viewer to do. And so then some work is for sale and some work is not for sale. And how do you determine what is for sale and what is not for sale?
Most of my work doesn't last. So it'll eventually sort of dry out and become something else. And so for that reason, I want it to just have this light while it's on display, and people can kind of see it change and morph, but it can't really live beyond that.
Right.
So,
yeah. And so when we talk about, you know, the commodification of art, right, or how do you monetize what it is that you do, that's a different conversation. Another reason for Roy, right? You know, we're a nonprofit gallery and we raise money to support the artists and the work in the gallery, so that the artists do not have to worry about whether or not it's for sale, right?
Right.
So this is a space where you could do that. That would not necessarily be the case in all spaces.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so that must certainly be a sense of relief, right? You can do whatever you want, of course.
Yeah, that you guys aren't relying on what comes from the sale.
Yeah, exactly. But there is an impermanence about your work too.
Absolutely.
And so because some of the objects that you showed us to jury are not objects available any longer because they have a life to them. And so you're always thinking about maybe the next iteration of what it is that you do, or how do you decide what materials to experiment and what cannot be experimented with?
Right, because I applied with a lot of my bread.
Yes.
Which, you know, I can remake and rebake that, but it only lives for as long as it's in
Right.
each sort of exhibition. And I think that's sort of what draws me to a lot of these
Mhm.
materials, is that they have this lifespan and you can see them change in the same way that like we are breaking down and changing as well. And so that was also what drew me to kind of this fermentation process, which really came, you know, grows out of like bread fermentation.
Sure, yeah.
And so this other material that's both sort of this collaboration between me and like this sort of living bacteria,
Right.
and the same like chance and disintegration.
Exactly, yeah. It's interesting, you know, in a different medium, but performance, right? You connected with a band at a certain age. Those are the 3 songs you love that they play. They've stopped playing those songs 10 years ago, right? In my case, 40 years ago, never mind that. But you don't want to, they don't want to play the old songs, but you want to hear the old songs. There are no old songs for you. This is it. Now we're moving on to something else. So that's exciting, but also terrifying.
Yeah.
Well, that does make me wonder, like, have you ever considered like using objects once they're like sort of disintegrated or like become like old moldy pieces of bread? Like, I don't know if that's inspiring to you or not.
Yeah, I think figuring out sort of how do you show old moldy bread without like, you know, freezing that in. I think it is really interesting and something, that I want to continue to think about.
Cool. Same question to you then, as we're talking about like the viewer and interactions, but then also materials and the lifespans of things, and maybe pick up that thread where we left off.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that I do like painting, which is relatively permanent, but I've sort of undone that by de-stretching them and just offering them as scrolls, because that does not do well, like in term, like long term, it does sort of destroy the paintings. The middle cow painting is like over 3 years old, I think. And so it's become like sort of like lumpy and misshapen. So I've considered like going back to stretch paintings. Not really sure. That's a whole issue with like space that I have to think about.
Yep.
And yeah, it's just like a very like economical decision to keep them as they are now. But I think it like helps with making them more shareable. I have like the bucket of scrolls that people can go through. And so I just see it like as another means of communication, to just like hand someone a scroll instead of just showing a painting, you know?
Right.
It involves like some tactile experience of like investigating, which I
And
think draws people in.
Right, and unfurling it, right? And it's revealing itself in that time of you're opening it up, right?
Yeah, there's like a little surprise to it every single time, because you like can't tell what's going to be inside. So.
Exactly. Yeah. From the title or whatever's on the back, you don't know till you unroll it. Yes. I did witness people doing that, of course, going and opening up and then having conversations and like tilting them around to show somebody else, which you can't do with something that's on a wall, right? You can point, but you can't have that same kind of a reveal each time.
And it's sort of like collaborative, because some of them are like really large, so it takes 2 people to do that work. And it's, I don't know, just there's something about like having a group of people like sort of sift through it and figure it out together that I think is just really fun.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Did you want to say something?
Well, I think you were originally asking like what was for sale, and
oh yeah, the commodification. Well, yeah, it kind of got up for the whole thing.
And then I'm like, well, everything's for sale.
Yes.
But in terms of like the risk taking that like you were able to take, because like it's site specific, and there's a sense of risk taking when you're talking about the bands that make music and that they're afraid to change because maybe they won't have an audience anymore.
Right. Yeah.
My work has had so many abrupt stages of evolution that like I might have one body of work that's super popular and then I sell all of it. And then like the next body, it just is sitting there and all my family member and friends have it on their walls because they're fostering them. So I think staying true to whatever vision is in front of me, whether it be commodifiable or not, has been an important goal. And I mean, I don't know how this work's going to do in Ohio. I'm still fairly new coming back to Ohio. But it's the work I know I need to make.
Yeah, and that is something too, right? Because there is that moment of, I need to make this, right? It's and I'm not a creator. I'm in awe of you that have found time to create and motivation to create, especially under these extraordinary circumstances. But there is something about that where I have this, I need to get it out. I need to put it on something. And that release of the art is the thing. Whether or not somebody receives that or not, maybe beside the point in some cases, right? Because you had to get it out there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Is it hard to sell things? As in, oh my gosh, I took so much time with that. It's like my own little, I can't let that go.
I mean, I have a few pieces at home that I hope that no one ever wants to buy them. But I know like financially, if presented, I probably would sell them. But as I get older, the preciousness of each piece, like I want to protect it and document it and archive it, keep it safe, but the preciousness of each piece, it's less crucial, and I'm able to move on and make more work. So if I sell something, I know that I have a catalog of ideas that are waiting for me for the rest of my life. So it'll be okay.
Right. And that is a different experience than Erin and Nalani have with work that is either for sale or fleeting, right? And then how do you, because then documentation is crucial to your work. It is for everyone's, and for all those artists out there, please document your work. Please put it in an Excel sheet. Please keep track of when it is that you created it. Please have a really good image of it. Roy is available should you want a nice white blank wall to hang up your artwork and photograph it, because you need that. You need a portfolio of work of things that you have done. And so then documentation for you becomes the thing, right?
Yeah, it's really important and can be hard to figure out. I'm not great at documenting my own work, so I tend to hire someone or have friends do it.
Yes.
Because that's really all I have left.
That's exactly right. Yes. Yeah. We talk about that with emerging artists all the time, those things that, what keeps you from creating? Well, the business of the arts does, but it's necessary, right? You need to be, updating your CV. You need to be honing your statements. You need to be documenting your work, promoting yourself, marketing, all those kinds of things, tracking sales, 1099s, whatever. All those things keep you from creating, but they all enable you to create and to continue to do so. So yes, a necessary evil, I think. And then Erin's work is it's very interesting because, we have Katherine's work. It's for sale. It's a tangible piece of something. You can take it home with you. It's ready to go. Nalani's work, not for sale. It is an experience that you have in the space, and that's it. And then Erin's is sort of like in between those things. There are some things that you can only experience here, but there are some things that you could purchase and take home with you. So yes. And they're in balance or not in balance or in complement to each other, or I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure that out for myself, but all the paintings are for sale. It's sort of hard to part with them, I think, because I see all the paintings as like one big archive, like this collage. So it maybe it's just being sentimental about paintings, but I find it hard to part with them for that reason, because they're just one big collection. But I of course want them to sort of infect the world and be in people's homes.
That's a good way to put it. Yes. Okay.
And documenting, it's odd because I'm just taking a picture of one thing, but they're like activated by being in the space. So I have to, there's like 2 different modes of documentation. Obviously taking a picture of like an installation is much harder than just like a painting. Actually, I don't know about that, because I guess paintings can be pretty hard to like get it right when you photograph. So yeah, it's just like 2 different like modes of thinking.
Right. Yes. And then you have the zines also. And I want to touch on that a little bit because while you were here as an intern, that was a project that you did.
Yeah.
And then that began a conversation with us, an internal conversation about the sustainability of intern projects. You know, if there's an intern, and this is how we work with interns at the gallery, that, you know, there's certain things that interns need to get done here, right? But we want the experience to be enjoyable and beneficial. And so if they have a particular passion or a project that they want to work on, we want to encourage that. So you did a zine, which you now have here. So that is germane to you and your practice creating these zines. But we now have some interns who are interested in zines. And so it's almost become here are the projects that we have that other interns have wanted to do. Do you want to do this project so that we can sustain it? Or is it on hiatus for a while? And so that's the kind of interesting thing about Roy too, right? Because we're experimenting all the time. And so we're not maybe offering the exact same menu of things all the time to interns. But can you talk a little bit about the zine in your practice and how that is another way for you to, you know, exchange with people, but also another way for you to maybe tell your story, or what is the purpose of the zine?
Well, I guess about like a year and a half ago, I just got really interested in print media. Obviously, a lot of my practice involves like using printed media because it's somewhat reliable. I think maybe it was like part of the like doomsday mindset that I was and just thinking about.
We
like,
all were in.
Exactly, yeah, that like it's the only thing that's going to survive. It's shareable. And there's something that's easy to disseminate and give to people. And I think it just heightens the experience. I think of like this iteration as sort of the textbook for this like fake school that's being set up here. This is actually the 2nd edition. I did it once before in like the similar style, like the 1st edition of Domestic Magazine. So it's just cool to see it evolve, and like each iteration I hope can be different and have like its own unique purpose, but be sort of like a complete compendium or whatever of my work. But it's cool, yeah, that it's like sort of lived here or like lived on in Roy through the Roy zines, which are obviously like much different,
right?
A little more straightforward, but
yes, I think it's sort of as a tool for interaction and a tool for marketing. And we used to have, you know, as everyone did, like a gallery guide or a postcard, or no one wanted to touch paper for the last 2 years. And so we moved to like QR codes that connect right away to the website where you can read more about the artists. And then, but then the zine is more of like a conversation between the interns who are doing it and the artists, and something for the viewer to sort of use as a guide as they're walking around. And because they're fairly inexpensive to reproduce, the ones that we make anyway, we're able to, people can just keep the copy that they have. And I saw people last night walking around with those in their pockets, which I was glad to see. So did your conversations though with the interns to create the zines, did those help you to see your work differently, or help you to think about things about your work that you hadn't yet considered? Or maybe if you could talk a little bit about your experience with the Roy zine.
Well, I was asked about like what role sound would play, which I guess I hadn't really thought about. It just seemed like a natural decision. But then I realized, like, if you're adding another sense to this, like that means everything, because that's the only example of sound like in the space. So yeah, it just helped me like sort of clear up my mind a little bit, and I'm glad that people can like see that sort of monologuing, or I guess dialoguing, while engaging with the space, because I think it like a lot of people have questions, about something so like large and like multifaceted that it's nice to at least like give some reassurance and explanation for at least like one aspect, especially because like the sound that I'm using is like sort of niche and like not a lot of people have heard of creepypastas or like that whole internet sphere of like horror stories. So yeah, it's just cool to like expose that to people and give an explanation.
That's good. I think it's a tool for us because a lot of people who come to Roy want to come to Roy. They know you or your work, or they know Roy and its reputation. They want to see what's new. But we also have people who've never been to Roy and didn't intend to go here necessarily. They were part of a tour or an exploration of the district. And so any of these kinds of tools that we can give newcomers to Roy to, you know, further engage with the work is great. So yes, but to you, Nalani, what did you think about that?
Well, I really appreciated the questions. I was definitely asked about sort of like the domestic and gender and how that plays a role. And so to kind of concisely talk about all of that for this kind of publication was helpful, just in thinking about both sort of my influences, like who I'm looking at and who I'm reading, and how those sort of theories around gender play into my work, and then also the materials that I'm sort of adopting from the domestic space.
That's good. Yeah. And for us, I mean, the interns have, you know, different experiences. They're not all studio majors. Some are art history majors, some are art education majors, art therapy majors. And so all of these are ways that through their lens, they can interact with the art too. So it's very helpful for them to be writing critically about the work. And Abby's doing that on our blog, for instance. So yeah.
I remember one of the questions was about what is the most challenging aspect of the work. And I mean, I'm hanging completed work on the wall that I have deemed complete and ready for the world to see. So that question called me to a vulnerability to sort of bring in the studio and into this space, talking about my challenges of working full-time, fitting a studio practice in with that, negotiating my ideas with how they're going to be executed in real life. I'm a very private person, so like talking about the challenges of the work, it allowed me to be vulnerable.
Good. Well, I'm glad that you had that experience and that you felt safe to be able to share those things too. So yes, it cannot be easy to, again, I'm not a maker, but I can imagine it cannot be easy to make something, be so intimately connected to it, put so much of yourself into it, and then share it, not for nothing, but also chat about it once you have shared it. So yes, and put yourself out there for people to respond to it. Yeah. Well, good. Well, I'm glad that was an experience, a positive experience. That's good. Yeah. Okay, so in that same vein, then, as you're talking about finding time for a studio practice, how, you know, that is a question. How do you find time to still make work given everything that's happening in the world and what it is that you have to do in order to, you know, make a living, right? How do you find time and how do you prioritize creating?
I'm a very passionate person. So in terms of hard work, I have to really figure out how to funnel my energy, and not only to whatever is bringing me income 40 hours a week, but also reserving that best energy for the studio. And that's always been a challenge. I remember having an app at one point where I would clock in and clock out because I was very
of your studio.
Of my studio.
Oh, yeah.
And that was very, I read this book, Laziness Doesn't Exist. I forget who the author is, but it really made me think about how ingrained culturally I feel like I need to work hard in order to have whatever outcome. And sometimes that can get in the way of really thinking through the ideas that are underlying in the work. I'm going off on a tangent.
No, it's all right. You're finding time to create, but you're also, I mean, making the most of the time that you have.
Absolutely.
So literally, if you are thinking about clocking in and clocking out, you can actually talk about ROI, right? What is the return on the investment of your time and energies? But also making the most of that time. Do you sketch ahead of time what it is you're going to do, or?
Yeah, so while I'm working, I try to find, if I'm in the right mindset, working outside of the studio, I try to maintain sketches that I revisit, recalculate, use a projector to see it at different scales, layer on a light box, just so that I can get at my previous ideas from different angles.
Interesting. And then with that, you can also, you know, pick and choose some aspects of something to maybe goes with something else, and now it's a whole new piece, but you also have a documentation of the evolution of your work over that time period too. Yeah. Yeah, it cannot be easy to figure out, Nalani, how to install threads across the space. We had conversations about options. You know, each space is going to be a little different. That you cannot hang from fire suppression pipes, as it turns out. So we have to have another plan. And so, yeah, if you're not familiar with the space, what's your process for making time to create, but then also determining where those creations are going to be? Because unless you're making something site specific, which you may or may not be doing, maybe you have a concept that you're adapting. But what is that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think my studio practice definitely does ebb and flow. And part of this, like making work specifically for each exhibition opportunity, pushes me to really make that time. So a lot of when I'm not getting ready for an exhibition is sort of more the material experimentation, trying to understand how the materials work as best as possible, so that then when I have the opportunity to show it, I can kind of adapt quickly to how to install it and sort of know those materials. So
and also how those materials will react to time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just have like these little things like hanging in my kitchen for the sink for like a month.
I'm picturing that now. Yeah, petri dishes of art experiments for the next time.
Yeah.
But yes, because if you have a month and you know a certain fermentation process takes 6 weeks, that is not the right fermentation process for that. Or you start something ahead of time. I guess, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's like kind of finding these different moments. And so obviously spend a lot more time in the studio when I know I have an exhibition opportunity, but then kind of constantly thinking about it. And I also think because so much of my material does draw from these things I'm encountering outside of the studio, that I can kind of incorporate a lot of that material thinking outside of the studio and kind of bring it in. But it's hard to find that balance. And I think for me, having a space that's sort of designated for that can be really helpful.
Sure. Yeah, that's something also. I mean, not only creating time for a process, but also creating a space for that process, something that you could close the door or move to a different space if you're not ready to work on, or something, or you know, something that is separate but also integrated with your with your life. It's sort of a delicate balance, isn't it? Yeah, interesting. Okay, Erin, to you. We got off on a tangent. Do you want to remind where we started?
Sure,
we are talking about how do you make time for creating? How did you find the motivation for creating? And you know, what kinds of things do you do in terms of strategy to maintain that time?
Well, I guess I'm pretty lucky to have a job that is sort of creative or creation oriented. So I'm able to like stay in that mindset even when I go home. And for a lot of my process, it's very like scavenging based. So like just picking stuff that I have around my apartment, or like I find in alleyways or whatever, like gifts that I'm given. So Some of it just sort of happens naturally. With the collaging element, I'm able to, just sit and watch Housewives and like cut out things from books or whatever.
There you go. Okay,
So,
yeah.
but with painting, it's a little different.
Sure.
That takes like a lot of time. I don't really have like a studio setup, so it's just me like sitting in my living room on the floor, just trying to make it work. And coming out of undergrad, it's weird. I'm in like this transition period. I had most of the paintings done before I like really started working. So I think going forward, it's going to be a big it's going to be like sacrificing time, to like make time to paint. It's going to like take a lot of effort. So it was like pretty tiring to like build up this whole exhibit. And I don't really know if I have like a healthy solution figured out quite yet. But now that this is up, I'll have time to like sort of figure that out on my own.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, how long does a painting take, right? How long does a concept take to bring to fruition? Those are all things that will be, part of that process for you too, I would imagine.
Yeah, and like figuring out maybe there's like new alternatives to painting that I like haven't even figured out yet. That I mean, mine are all acrylic, so it's not as like intense. If it was oil painting, it would be a whole different story.
Right.
So it is pretty like basic, the process, but it's still, there's a whole ritual associated with it.
Sure.
So you have to like make space for that when you can. And I mean, it matters to me, so I'll keep doing it.
Well, see, that's good. And people around you who support you will understand that, right? That you want to have that as a priority. So that's awesome too. It takes a village. So we absolutely do need the support of other people in our lives to be able to continue to create things. Okay, so I also wanted to talk a little bit about when is the work finished? And how do you know when the work is finished? Because there was a moment where it was like, okay, pencils down. We had a deadline for this installation in order to get it ready for, right? So that is one thing, of course. But then are you looking at the work thinking, I wish I had done this, or I wish I had added that, or, this piece should have done that. Do you go back to work and work on it later and improve it, or is it done and done? And how do you determine that?
Well, I guess for mine, it's sort of weird to put like the whole installation process into a week, because it feels like it should be just like a continuous growth that like takes months or whatever. Like it feels like it should be a natural sort of build up, but it isn't, it can't be. So you just sort of have to like keep building and building, and just make it as real as possible, as believable as possible. There was more that I wanted to add. We talked about the stars. They're just like, it couldn't happen.
Right.
Just based on the space. So
Yes.
you have to like make cuts and edit. But yeah, I would like to see like a project that can be just sort of built on. And maybe that's just like, if I get a studio, that could just be like my studio. But yeah, I would like to keep building, but eventually you just have to like tell yourself it's good enough. People are gonna at this point. So yeah, you just have to self-edit and like constrain. I think
Yes.
for my process.
Yes.
Yeah, and I do think these like deadlines can be kind of a nice like marker of like, okay, it's done for now. And then like, because like this felt very complete and like I had the time I needed, and yet I leave here and I'm like, oh, I'm excited to like play with this material and see it in these other iterations. So it's both feels complete but not done, I guess. So I don't think there's anything that I would necessarily change or that feels like it's missing for this iteration. But I also think there's always been this like excitement to keep growing with it.
Yes, and yours also will create more work, right? Do the skins
Yes.
come from the, right? So
Right. So it's
Yeah.
like they're actually dripping into
Yeah,
these
and-
pots that are creating the skins. And so it is kind of a cycle.
Yes, right. I'm just looking as we're chatting. I am paying attention to what you're saying, but I'm also looking in the chat. So if anyone has questions, please place them there. Or feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. But go ahead. Yes,
Yeah.
Catherine, yeah.
So,
Because we did some editing also. Everybody did.
yeah.
You know, that always happens. You bring more work than works in the space that, you know, once, you know, you have a good, strong presence in the space, then you don't need to add anything else to it, but there is that moment of trying to determine what that is. And so, yeah. You have,
So I think I don't remember how many pieces I ended up eliminating. I had the core pieces that I knew I wanted on the walls in conversation with each other. And then I like to be prepared, and I like to have
Yes.
and the work that I have installed, I think it was between like 2019 and 2021. I don't know if anything was cutting into January. The point is, I like to sit with the work long enough after it's finished before I allow it to be seen. It's just an extra buffer of criticality that I can have before I let the world see it. And I was telling you last night, I've had enough experiences where things have revealed themselves after the fact, that it's good to live with it for a little bit before it's seen by the world. And in terms of how long a piece takes, I mean, my point of view, it takes what it takes.
Yep. There you go.
I mean, was it Antonio Lopez Garcia? There, like, some of his paintings took like a decade. You know, they just take what they take. And I mean, the triptych back and different facets of it would take weeks to dry. And then I moved back to Columbus and I didn't touch it for several months, and then I picked it back up. I don't do anything all in one setting. I like having intentionality with each move.
Okay, and then I guess I want to give you the opportunity. We're coming up on our time. Usually these conversations are about an hour, and so we have about, I don't know, 10 minutes or so. What is next for you? What is next in your career? Do you have an exhibition coming up? You've decided to cash roll in and move into dentistry? No. What is next? Any place, start any place.
Well, I don't really know.
Yeah.
Honestly.
That's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking with some people. I might have a show across the street, 400.
Oh,
We'll
great.
see, we'll
All right.
see. I don't know.
In Promenade or
Yeah.
Bridge or, okay.
Oh, 400.
Yes, there's spaces like Promenade is there, Gallery or Bridge Gallery or.
Oh, yeah. I'm not sure. We'll see.
Yeah.
But I think for now, I'm just going to be working. And I'm really excited, honestly, to just be a normal person and just sort of like soak up, you know, all the different references and inspiration wherever I can, because eventually, you know, your brain just overheats and you can't like keep making forever.
Yeah.
So I'm just looking forward to taking care of my cat.
That's good, because you do. I mean, you know, I reference these extraordinary circumstances, but truly, if the thing that feeds you has not been available to you, going out, experimenting, you know, seeing new things, travel, whatever. Yeah. How do you find the inspiration to create? You're right. You've got to take a moment to just reflect back on where am I going next? And that's a wonderful thing, really, very important to do. Yeah.
My next exhibition, I have a collaborative two-person show with actually Nalani.
Yes, Ishimura, yes.
Yeah.
So I totally see the two of your works together. Yes.
So that's kind of where I want to dive into next. We're trying to kind of really make a collaborative installation, bringing in elements from both of our works. So that install is early June in Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah.
Diving into that.
That is awesome. Oh, yeah, I can absolutely see those. I see that. And that's the interesting thing too. We talked about that a little bit yesterday, just, with people in the space. And we were giving a tour to CCAD staff and faculty yesterday about how the world is connected in that way. You don't know, but some of our artists who began at Roy, we will see your work other places. I love that, you and Manami together, that work, that would be really wonderful. Last November, we had two artists whose work was paired, as we do, and they did not know each other. They lived 15 minutes from each other in Brooklyn. Now they collaborate on things. So you never know. That's so exciting. Oh, that's cool. Yes. Okay.
So Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah.
And
Everyone's going to Wisconsin.
Yeah,
It's a hot place. Yeah.
in the fall at James May Gallery,
Uh-huh.
I'm slated for a 2-person.
Great.
But yeah, I mean, I have a lot of hopes and dreams with my art and like wanting to teach and do as much studio time as possible. The best I can say is that I have a long list of past goals and more goals in the future, and about 1% pulls through.
Yeah.
And then it's just accepting the rejection and not giving up.
Yes.
I mean, that's just the fact of
Yes.
it. So,
Yes.
yeah.
For the galleries too. I mean, it hurts our hearts.
Yeah.
We have to say no more than we can say yes. And by combining artists' exhibitions and having shows where there are 3 or 4 or 5 artists, we can serve more artists. So this year there'll be 39 artists exhibiting at Roy, but then that also means that you're still collaborating with other artists in your spaces. A 2-person show is a luxury at Roy, right? So yes, but that's exciting. And so then you'll be able to, collaborate with somebody else and get to know their work too. So that's very cool. Awesome. All right. Well, if anyone has any questions, let us know that now. We are coming up on our time. Thank you for joining us. We really do appreciate that. Oh, I'm seeing something in the chat. Let me see if I can get there. Okay, we'll go back to. Very good. All right. All right. Last wrap up. Anybody have anything that you want to add that we did not cover? Something that you wanted to talk about or ask or? No, I know. We covered a lot. It was a good conversation. I appreciate that. And see, the hour didn't take very much time at all. So wonderful. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being on the call. And we're going to, as I said, we're recording this. So we will put that up on our YouTube channel. And you'll be able to see the work in the gallery. To May 6th is a closing date. Gallery hours are Wednesday to Sunday, 12 to 6, and we are going to be closed over the Easter weekend. So Friday to Sunday. Otherwise, we'll have regular gallery hours. All right. Thank you all so much for your kind attention. I appreciate the conversation. Thank you all.